there a line between kind of madness and
Well, no, it's real alarming to me if somebody doesn't recover their baseline of consciousness in a pretty big hurry. This is an unknown area. No one knows what schizophrenia is. People may have unusual metabolisms. They may have unusual food habits. They may simply be delicately balanced. If somebody tells me that they have visions on the natch and have all their life dealt with elves and flying saucers, and I don't urge a heavy program of psychedelic involvement. It seems superfluous and maybe destructive. I am just a stone, I just cling to the baseline of consciousness. It takes a great deal to move me off it, and I never hallucinated on LSD unless I would smoke a lot of hash and do a bunch of exercises, and it was just very elusive. And so I don't advocate, in fact, drug taking. I think that what we lack is a professional shaman class. And, I won't speak to audiences more larger than this, because I don't want to even be perceived as leading some kind of crusade. I don't think that we should convince people who haven't taken drugs to take them. I think if we think drugs are a good thing, we should take more of them. The real problem is to get people to take enough. The number of people who are running around passing themselves off as experts on the psychedelic experience who have never, in fact, it's like sex and orgasm. Everybody can have sex and talk about it, but the question is, did you get off? And it's totally subjective and elusive, very hard to talk about. Unless you watch somebody who's stoned, you can't tell whether they got off or not. So we need to build a consensus about what the psychedelic experience is. If we had a more tightly shared consensus, these questions about ketamine and MDMA and all this couldn't even arise. They are clearly a different branch of the tree and not directly related to shamanism, which is about plants. Why try to do it without recourse to the plant spirits? That's what they're for. So, Adele. That's right. Early psychedelic trips, for most people, tend to be about the junk of your life. And, the people you've wronged and just the junk of your life. But if you can get through that, it begins to take on a less personal character and to be more like an invisible landscape, a place that you wander through and that you gain impressions of. But it's only in the early phase, and then once those knots have been untied, then you can voyage and see clearly the invisible landscape rather than only see the knotted skein of your own hang-ups. Marty, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to address the fact about taking a lot and doing it by yourself. I think the cosmic psyche is changing so fast that that scares me some too. I think in moving from the patriarchal to the matriarchal, we go through what the Buddhists say, not that, not that, not that, and finally we find out who we are. And from the feminine point of view, it's I am that, I am that, I am that. And if you're willing to take a large dose and to meet death, and if you know that death is the invisible landscape, and that you don't know what it is, and do that by yourself, and know that you will stay in the darkness and contained as the feminine stays contained, then do it by yourself. It often is good to have a guide or somebody who would sit outside your door if you don't want them in there, but somebody that would remind you that you decided you want to do this, and you don't need to tell the world that death is wonderful or something.
That's good advice. What you have to arrange is that the other person is not distracting you. That's all. And that's what I mean by taking it alone. It's just very, like, I almost never take psychedelics with anyone other than Kat because I just worry too much about the other person. I just cannot stop myself from worrying and listening to their breathing, and it just totally hangs me up. And some people don't have that problem. I have friends who are therapists, and I just say, how do you do it? How can you do it? How can you watch somebody go through these things and not be drawn in? So I'm the kind of personality who's subject to the transference, and I don't expose myself to those situations. This trip that I had in Hawaii, I thanked God that somebody was there, that Kat was there specifically, because just the sound of her voice completely ameliorated a whole spectrum of hard to describe but very icky things that were threatening to overwhelm me. And I don't have trips like that very much where I need somebody there. So it was fortunate that it was like that. But no, I'm not advocating that if you've never taken mushrooms, you go up on a mountain in the dark and take 8 grams. I mean, it might be good for you, but I'm not advocating it because it might not be good for you, But eventually, Plotinus called the mystical experience the flight of the alone to the alone. And there is something about that. The last dance you do alone. And it can't be otherwise. The main point out of all these statements about drugs and this and that is, if it doesn't scare you, it's not worth doing. And it certainly scares me every time. I mean, I don't want you to think there's nothing heroic about it. It's just terrifying, and it's the only form of terror I will submit to. I will not jump from airplanes. I do not shoot the rapids. I do not rock climb. I'm a bookish person. But I will submit to that terror because it seems to make sense. But it isn't unterrifying. It is exceedingly terrifying. That's where I think it lies. And that's why these questions of abuse and all that can't arise. God, nobody abuses these drugs as far as I can find out, unless they do too little, unless they are 1 grammers or something. Well, it's 4:44. Are there any more questions? Kat, would you like to? Please. That's right.
Yes, what you bring to it.
And what the wage is.
Yes.
It's the great unknown. The thing that is so troubling about our culture is that everything is canned, and even like the UFO issue, most people want to go down to the grocery store and see that both Time and Newsweek have a cover. They've landed. The Secretary General of the United Nations is meeting with them 3 times a day, and it's all coming down, and you wait to hear what it's all about. The fact of the matter is, it's just between you and it. It's not going to come through the Secretary General of the United Nations. It's between you and it. And psychedelics are about the immediacy of experience, not the dull, humdrum, repetitive daily routine of meditation and yoga and all of these things, but the immediacy of experience at a white-hot level, just the very unresolved magma of being, and the notion that millions, billions of people go from birth to the grave without ever touching that, unless they touch it in those last few moments of life, is heart-rending. That's an affront to humanness. If we are going to be human and to experience the modalities of being, and experience is the key word, if we're going to experience the modalities of being, then you have to write these things into your script somewhere. And this is obvious to everyone who's deeply involved with these things. We would meet ayahuasqueros off in the bush, and the guy would say, "Señores, you're great doctores, great scientists, but the primary thing is the experience." And we said, "Yes, we know. We'll sit at your feet as you show us how to make it. We have no illusions. We know that the primary thing is the experience." And so it's your own life. It's a dialogue between you and being. It's authentic being, not canned being. It's not an ideology. It's not a teaching that comes from some august being that you can never hope to be like, who's handing it down to you. It's you. You must recognize yourself as the primary focus, the primary vehicle for unraveling what's going on, and then the psychedelics emerge as having major, paramount importance in your life. And this, if we could authenticate being, if we could insist on pushing back the canned stuff more and more, we would begin to recapture the tremendous authenticity that we sense in these archaic people like the Maya and the Tibetans and the Witoto and the Jivaro. It's that they do not, to the degree that they are not involved in 20th century culture, they do not have canned experience. They have real experience, moment to moment, in the now. And I said at some point in this lecture, the psychedelics return us to origins. Our origin is in this primary datum of self-experienced being. And civilization has clouded and occluded this. But if you don't recover it by some means, authentic being will elude you. And authentic being is what the inner health and dynamic harmony that we're all working for is about. Well, thank you very much for your attention and for your peer review, and good luck to all of you. And whether we meet again or not, I hope that you all remain true to the impulse which brought you here today, because I think it is a true one and a good one. I think this is a path with heart that we have all met at this particular campfire site, and the paths may go off into the bush in many directions, but they're all paths with heart if we can recall that we've shared this kind of moment where there's a search for an authentic understanding of being. So thank you very much.
Thank you.